So hi Koustubh, great to have you on Conversation About Cats, and what an exciting cat this is. A little bit about you. You work with the Snow Leopard Trust and you have been in all sorts of exciting parts of the world because snow leopards occur all over the place. Koustubh leads a small team with support from international organizations to coordinate a unique alliance called the Global Snow Leopard and Ecosystems Protection Program. The Secretariat is based in Bishkek. This brings together the governments of 12 snow leopard range countries, NGOs and conservationists. He's a senior regional ecologist at the Snow Leopard Trust and helps with field research, data analysis, conservation and training programs. He's done some work earlier on the rare four-horned antelope, also called the chausinga in India. Been always interested in population ecology, conservation biology, and technology uses for conservation. So we share that in common. That is wonderful. So before we start, Koustubh, on your presentation, I just wanted to talk a little bit about snow leopards because I think people really don't know very much about them. They're one of the lesser seen and lesser heard of species in India, at least. So can you tell us about the snow leopard? Are they found only in India or are they found in other places as well? Let's start from the basics.
Hi Latika, and thank you very much for having me on this discussion board, if you may say so. Really a pleasure talking to you. And so talking about the snow leopard, there are 12 countries across the world where they are found, and these include India, sure, but the most snow leopards in the world are in China, followed by Mongolia, and then India, Kyrgyzstan, Nepal, Bhutan, Pakistan, Uzbekistan, Afghanistan, and the other countries follow. So yeah, snow leopards, if you look at them, they are more like the custodians of this central South Asian high mountains, from where a lot of rivers originate, where we, around the areas where we live.
Fantastic. And just for people to know, how large is a snow leopard? When you're looking at it, most people are used to tigers and they're used to leopards. Yeah. So how does this compare?
So roughly a snow leopard would be around 35 to 45 kilograms in weight. So you can certainly look at them as lighter than even the common leopard or an adult common leopard. Size-wise, you can just call 1 meter of a body and 1 meter of a tail. So it's one of those charismatic species whose tail is an entity in itself, right? So it's like a python that's moving behind the the cat all the time.
Yes, amazing. Okay, and if I understand correctly, there is almost no records of a snow leopard having attacked human beings. So it's not the snow leopard. Yeah,
go ahead. Sorry.
So I said, so it's not we who have to fear the snow leopards, but more the threat is more from us to them. Is that correct?
That's right. I mean, there are a couple of instances where snow leopards are known to have counter-attacked humans, but in almost 100% of those cases, it has happened when a cat has been cornered, and out of fear, just to get out of that cornered space, they may have charged. But really, I mean, there's no known deaths of humans because of snow leopards at all. And I mean, why do we need to go elsewhere? I've had my closest ever encounter, really less than a meter from a cat, where it just came up on a ledge, found me there, and almost made an expression like, how can a human get so close to me and I don't get to know? Turns around and just flares away like a ribbon. So yeah, I mean, they just want to avoid you as much as possible.
Yes, I've experienced that too. So yes, I know what you're saying. So could we see your wonderful presentation now, please?
Sure, thank you. Okay, I'll start with this beautiful picture of a beautiful girl whose name is Kaniki. Now Kaniki lives with her family in the mountains of central Tian Shan, and her father is a herder who makes just about $2,500 per year. Now, if I tell you that her family receives services whose economic value is nearly $18,000 per year, which is roughly 7 times their family income, you'll obviously think twice about the numbers that I'm saying. But I'm not exaggerating. It is actually these pristine mountains that provide up to 30 provisional services that can be valued in terms of the actual cost, in terms of what people are receiving from these mountains. Not just Kaniki, but these mountains also provide water to billions of people of the planet living downstream. We all follow news and would know the economic damages that extreme climate events are causing across the world, whether it's the bushfires in Australia, the frozen lakes of American Midwest, or the catastrophic cyclones that we are facing in the Indian subcontinent. These extreme events are not just terrible for survival of life on Earth, but they also destroy our economies. Now, while the glaciers and permafrost layers in the mountains of Central and South Asia are one of the finest carbon sinks that help keep our climates in control, it is these mountains that are also most vulnerable to climate catastrophe that's going on around us. It's not even debatable that if you want to be healthy, you want your neighborhood to be healthy. If you want to be healthy, your ecosystem must be healthy. And there is this one species that we can easily claim to be serving as the thermometer of the health of the mountains of Central and South Asia. And it's these mountains which are also called as the third pole because of the amount of water they have stored in them. It is no surprise that cultures and religions across the region revere this predator, for it is the custodian of not just the mountains but entire ecosystems. And also why conservation of this one species through community-based approaches is known to address not just 1 or 2 but 10 to 13 of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals defined by United Nations. Well, no guesswork there. I am talking about the snow leopard, which is a species that does not need visas and passports to traverse through its home ranges, which cut across international borders often. And one reason we also call the snow leopards as the ambassadors of the mountains of Central and South Asia. I mentioned earlier, the snow leopard are distributed across nearly 2 million square kilometers of the rugged high mountains of Asia. It is these mountains that are also the origin of rivers that have fed and nurtured civilizations for millennia and are still feeding civilizations. In fact, it won't be an overestimate to say that billions of people from one of the most populated continent in the world are dependent on these mountains and the mountains that are guarded by the snow leopard for water, which is a limiting resource, if one would want to call it one. Snow leopards are found in 12 countries, which start from Bhutan and Nepal to the south to all the way to Mongolia and Russia, and you can see there is a belt of rugged mountains in between, connecting Pakistan, Afghanistan, India, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, all the way from Kazakhstan to Russian Federation and Mongolia. So you can see that it is some of these incredible countries which have very rich cultural heritage, which have a very rich history and past, where the snow leopards are found. Now, interestingly, although the snow leopards live in high mountains, they live below the altitude where you have permanently frozen surface, glaciers, or in other words, no vegetation. But they also live above the altitude where there are negligible trees. In other words, they live in a rather narrow altitudinal belt. Now think of the changes that we are causing to the Earth. Think of climate change, and you will notice how species will have to readjust to the changes in the habitat in the times to come. Snow leopards also have very large ranges, for a female ranging in more than 100-120 square kilometers, and males typically ranging in more than 250 square kilometers, and some floaters, youngsters as well as older individuals traveling several hundred square kilometers. With such large ranges, they do interface heavily with humans, and when a large predator interfaces with humans or livestock, they're bound to cause conflict. Yep, we just discussed the large home ranges that snow leopards have, and with such large ranges, they are bound to interface with humans and livestock. That in turn can cause conflict, and it does cause conflict. Snow leopards face a multitude of threats. These threats include retaliatory killing, where angry herders would persecute them for losing their livestock. There are poachers who are always on the lookout for illegal to feed the illegal wildlife trade, and there are greedy hunters who might want to over-harvest the wild prey out of greed. What's really fascinating though, and what's really intriguing in this case, is that threats that did not even seem like a possibility about 20 years ago have come up as major threats now. For instance, destruction of habitat for poorly planned infrastructure, mining, and something as horrible as canned hunting of snow leopards for trophies are some of the emerging threats the species is facing today. We all love dogs. I have grown up with dogs, but we love dogs at homes. We can't have dogs out in the wild, and dogs are causing havoc to our ecosystems. They're not just competing with snow leopards and wolves for wild prey. They have become one of the biggest threat to even domestic livestock in some of the mountain ecosystems where studies have been conducted. When properly implemented, we all know tourism can be a boon for conservation because it builds the best possible connection between livelihoods and well-being of wildlife. However, there's a fine line that differentiates well-implemented tourism from a poorly implemented tourism model. And especially in these fragile mountain ecosystems, if implemented poorly, if not conducted carefully, it can cause massive destruction to the fragile mountain ecosystems. Lastly, your and my lifestyle is resulting in rapid climate change. I mentioned about it a little earlier, but people often ask, where do you rank climate change as threat to snow leopards or these mountain ecosystems? I would actually go ahead and say it's not a threat, but it's the mother of all threats. It's anybody's guess that with increasing temperatures, surfaces that have been frozen for years will melt and bring along pathogens, including viruses and bacteria, that our bodies are not likely going to have any immunity against. I mean, if anything, this COVID-19 pandemic has shown how our disregard of nature leading to an unavoidable interaction with wildlife through illegal poaching and wildlife trade can lead to not just loss of life, but widespread economic crisis at various levels: local, national, regional, as well as global. So in a nutshell, if I may say so, climate change is going to interact with each existing threat, each emerging threat with a different at a different scale, and will ultimately amplify them to greater proportions than what we are facing today. Quickly changing gears, how do we address this? How do we address these threats that snow leopards are facing? So, as you all will appreciate, historically the conservation movement started with the idea of protected areas, which to a reasonable extent have managed to conserve some of our star species, be it the wolves, bisons, tigers, and so on. The challenge, however, is that these models work only in a few places. For example, in case of snow leopards, less than 10% of the protected areas are big enough to protect a viable population of snow leopards. Now that deems most protected areas redundant when it comes to saving snow leopards within protected areas. A large number of conservation programs, especially the successful ones that are being implemented in snow leopard habitat, focus on using economic or economically driven incentives for conservation. These could be community-owned ecotourism programs, insurance programs for livestock, community enterprise programs that produce handicraft, and so on. However, it's anybody's guess, these programs at best offset losses that people face because of sharing their spaces with wildlife. And often the contribution of these programs is often a fraction of the average annual incomes. So in 2017, the Kyrgyz government invited its counterparts to what we call as the International Snow Leopard and Ecosystem Conservation Summit and a Green Economic Forum in Bishkek. And this was the first time business leaders from Central and South Asia participated as possible allies. The purpose of this Green Economic Forum was to engage businesses that are otherwise seen as adversaries when it comes to environmental losses. And this is where the whole idea of changing the conversation about conservation spawned. So what we need is, we need a new paradigm where we look at conservation as an essential entity to facilitate economic development. What it requires is looking at conservation more holistically than it is right now in most parts of the world. If you look at this graph, you will notice that conservation plans often look at the first three zones to work in. What we really need to add is the fourth zone, which is that of sustainable livelihoods. And this is where the links between livelihoods and ecosystem conservation can be explicitly stated and valued. Talking about valuation of ecosystem services, I'd like to share some very interesting figures that were part of my colleague Dr. Ranjani Murali's PhD work that recently got published in the Journal of Arid Environments. Now, I'm sure you all know Pashmina. It's a fashionable fiber that is sold at a premium across the world. Roughly, it costs around $170 per kilogram. The end products in the form of a shawl or jacket usually cost around $50 to $100, which puts the end product cost, if estimated in weight, to roughly around $300 to $400 per kilogram. Obviously, I'm not accounting for the craftsmanship that's gone behind this. We're just translating everything in terms of weight. Now, Ranjani, she went to 3 landscapes. 2 of them are producing Pashmina, Changthang in India and South Gobi in Mongolia. As one would expect, she found that herders get a much lower fraction of the cost of Pashmina, which is less than $40 per kilogram. Fair enough to some extent, but here comes the staggering figure. Ranjani's calculations estimated that the economic value of ecosystem services, those ecosystem services that can be bought in the market for actual cost or for actual payments, those economic services such as water, fodder, and so on, to produce 1 kilogram cashmere or 1 kilogram of pashmina, the economic value of ecosystem services is a staggering $500 to $700 per kilogram. Now, we are not paying that cost. I don't think anybody is paying that cost, but someone is, and that someone is probably nature. We all appreciate there are no free lunches, and if nature is being made to pay for something, she will have her own means to get a payback. And probably what we are seeing around the world is one of those means. So to conserve our ecosystems, its guardians, and ultimately ourselves, what we really need is knowledge, action on the ground, and prioritization in policies. We can no longer afford any more degradation of our natural ecosystems in the name of economic development. And it is almost as if we are trying to make revenue in one currency, in this case money, at the cost of another currency, which in this case is our whole well-being and health. The economic cost of climate change and zoonosis are no unknowns to us today. I don't think we can any longer treat nature's bounty as a freebie, because it is coming to us at a cost. It does come to us at a cost, and we ourselves are ending up paying for it. So what I'd like to end with is re-emphasizing that that ecosystem conservation is not a choice but a necessity for our survival, for our well-being, and for our economies. If anything, the COVID-19 pandemic has taught us in no uncertain terms how closely our lives and the livelihoods, our own livelihoods, are linked to natural ecosystems, and why illegal wildlife trade, habitat destruction, depletion of biodiversity are not someone else's but everybody's concern. So unless we use good science to build knowledge, I don't think we will be able to preempt the losses that zoonosis, climate change related extremities, and biodiversity loss will bring about in the coming years. And with that, I'd like to stop. Yep. Thank you.
Just taking off from what you said and asking you a tough question, which I get hit with all the time. One of the things that people ask me is, why this obsession with cats? Why are you only talking about cats? The landscapes are shared by other predators as well. There are other cats like the lynx, there's the Tibetan wolf. What exactly is the role of the snow leopard? Is it the apex predator? How does it compare to the wolf? And what impact will the extinction of the snow leopard have on these ecosystems? Can you explain that to everybody?
Okay, multiple parts to this question, but to begin with, we work with the snow leopards for various reasons, and as you rightly mentioned, it being the apex predator is the ideal thermometer that we have, which defines the health of everything that its umbrella is covering, right? So things go wrong with the pastures, they will reflect on the snow leopards. Things will go wrong with pollinators, let's say bees, for example. You bring in an invasive species of bees in an area, and they start displacing the local species of pollinators. Your vegetation will change, the herbivore composition will change, and ultimately the snow leopard will get affected. So I think what they do is they are a fine indicator of a healthy, functional ecosystem. Yes, they are very beautiful, I agree, and there is a bit of a bias there for sure. It's just such a charismatic species. Why wouldn't you want to save it to begin with? But and it doesn't end there. If you look at the cultures and religions and folk tales from these regions, snow leopards and tigers and all these charismatic species, they occur everywhere. So they are a symbol of our reverence, of our fascination, and of our fondness of what's out there in nature, right? So they are an ambassador. In other words, they represent the entire ecosystem. Yes, I would love it if someone would like to have a dung beetle as an ambassador of an ecosystem. Why not? And they are, but it doesn't mean that any species is less charismatic. It's about how you look at it. It's about perception.
Yes.
Okay. Did I miss your other question? I'm so sorry. If there was another question.
Lots of questions.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. So we were talking about the fact that protected areas cover very small portions of snow leopard, territories. And so, I mean, going back to snow leopard territories, what is the average size over 100 kilometers? Does it go less in some places, more in others? Is there a big variation in size?
Not quite, to be honest. There are earlier studies used radio telemetry, and I can never forget Raghu Chundawat making this very intriguing comment once, saying that, I started to follow snow leopards with radio telemetry, but I stopped following it because I ended up estimating my own home range, because I couldn't cross over those ridge lines as the snow leopard could. And that was a very, very profound statement in many ways. It's we who were limited by our human abilities to be able to understand the species beyond a certain extent. But that's where technology has come in as a boon to us. Today we have studies going on which are using satellite-based telemetry, and there are studies. There's one of the longest studies on this on snow leopards is going on in South Gobi in Mongolia, where so far our team has collared more than 30 snow leopards. Apart from that, in Nepal, in Afghanistan, sort of in Pakistan, one in snow leopard in Pakistan, and other parts as well. There have been some studies using telemetry, and more or less they all indicate, of course, I shouldn't forget Kyrgyzstan as well, but they all indicate a relatively large home range size than what we had earlier thought it to be. So the only published ones right now we have are from South Gobi, which indicate that the female's home range is around 100-120 square kilometers. Males could be double that size.
So in a lot of species like the marine mammals, now they're using remote monitoring using satellites. Are you using that instead of the traditional triangulation? How does it work?
Oh yes, so these collars are Formula 1 as compared to the triangulation ones that we used earlier. What they have is they have a GPS in them, they have a satellite phone in them, they have a radio beacon in them, they have a small memory chip as well, they have a motion sensor inside, which is more like a 3D accelerometer that our phones have, which allow you to play some games on phones as well. Now all of this is packaged into one small unit, and what these collars do is they record the location using GPS and transmit that data through satellite phone over email to someone. Let's say I'm sitting here in Bishkek and the snow leopard in Mongolia is emailing me every 5 hours, to the extent that people often joke that you guys are more in touch with your snow leopards than your own family. Well.
Yeah. So thank you for sharing that, because I think most people aren't aware of how we do all of this.
Yes.
I also know that camera trapping is an important tool for snow leopard monitoring.
That's right, Latika. That's right.
Tell us about this. How do you plan your camera trap placements? How often do you change their locations? How often do you go to check them? What does it involve? Because I know it's a huge effort to do this. Yeah.
So Latika, if I go back to the times when we were doing our research,
yes,
I would have never ventured into snow leopards with camera trapping. Each camera trap used to have those 32 photographs. It could take only 32 pictures. The battery would need to be changed every day.
Yeah.
I mean, I would have never been able to physically climb those ridge lines every day to change those. And I think, again, similar to what I mentioned about triangulation and telemetry with radio transmitters, there was a constraint here as well. Again, technology has come to a rescue. In what really has happened in the last 15-20 years, digital photography has grown rapidly. It comes with so many features. Now, these camera traps we use today, they don't need a flashlight, so there's no blinding of an animal. In the night, they just use an infrared flash, which is virtually invisible. So it doesn't blind an animal or a human or whoever gets photographed. These cameras can take up to 50 to 60,000 pictures non-stop. Now, that means we can leave some of these cameras for up to even a year and just go once a year and collect them. Yes, if it gets lost in avalanches or a flash flood or something, that's another challenge. Or it gets stolen, that of course you can't help. But otherwise, you can really leave them and let them be your eyes in the wild for months at end, if not up to a year. And lastly, they're quiet. They don't make any sound at all. So when a camera trap is taking pictures, nobody gets to even hear them. So they're very stealthy devices, little units, and they can just sit there in those mountains for days and months and so on. Now,
so
when it comes,
how do you decide where to put them?
Okay, so snow leopards, as we all know, they are like one of those big cats, very solitary. They do come together for sometimes sharing meals, as any big cat does. They do come together during mating season, and of course females are they do move around with their cubs, sometimes grown-up cubs as well. But like we communicate with our friends through social media. I think all social media channels should pay a royalty to snow leopards, because I feel they are they had the original social media wall post concept. Snow leopards, what we call as scrapebook, they have their own scrapebook where they look for specific locations which are under overhanging rocks or at perfect saddles, where they go and leave a sign, and the sign could mean a male snow leopard sending out a message, stay away from my territory, or a female leaving signs saying that, okay, I'm looking for a boyfriend. Who knows, what kind of what all messages are going around. But really, these are the messages that allow snow leopards to interact with each other. And these are the locations where, because they make these little scrapes, with a bit of a training, you can start figuring out, you can start thinking like a snow leopard and spotting those locations. These are the sites which are very valuable for camera trapping work, because they allow us to set cameras in a way that we do get reasonable pictures. And again, like tigers, snow leopards also have unique patterns. It's not as easy, if I may say so, as it is to identify a tiger, because tigers have a thin coat. Snow leopards have this ruffled coat which makes it look like different animals when it's wet, when it's dry, when it's in a different position. So that's a bit of a challenge, which makes it slightly difficult, but you can, with a lot of training and practice and being brutal with your misidentifications, you can start identifying individuals, and that's what we ultimately use to estimate their populations.
Wow. Okay. So another point that you brought up is that snow leopards actually live in a very narrow belt,
That's right.
sort of 3,000 meters to about 4,500 meters, maybe going up to 5,000 plus in some areas. Now, when you see the effects of global warming and you see the effects in climate change, and sometimes snowfall patterns change, then do they come they stay up higher? Do they come lower? How does that impact on the communities that are depending on them for tourism? People coming in to photograph them. How have been an obvious change? Can you see that happening?
Yeah. Now, to begin with, what's very interesting, Latika, is that while in parts of India and Bhutan, they're not found below, let's say, 3,000 meters or so. In parts of Mongolia, they're found at 800 meters above mean sea level.
Wow.
So there is a latitudinal shift as well in their altitudinal gradient, which makes it far more complex in many ways. But yes, everywhere they do seem to have this band, which seems to widen in certain seasons. Say we expect it to be constricted a little bit. In the winters, we expect it to widen a little bit, or the other way around. Really depending on where the food is. So for a predator, its life revolves around prey, and in some areas you do see them coming down to reasonably low altitudes, relatively lower altitudes, and that's largely accredited to the movement of prey, because when everything's frozen up there, there's nothing to eat, so ibex and blue sheep might be coming down, and then there would be an anticipated movement of just like, I'm following my food wherever it is. So that does happen, and we do expect changes. Now the problem with climate change, Latika, is that the impacts are not linear. It's a confounded impact. In some places it's going to lead to a very sudden extreme winter. Now that will have its own impacts, because it will make food accessibility difficult to a lot of prey, whereas in other areas it might just warm things up, so the species might move further up actually in those areas. So it's not going to be a linear impact that we are assuming everywhere they will just move up. In some areas, like in Mongolia, for example, there's this periodic event they call Zud, which is extreme harsh winter. The periodicity of Zud typically used to be once every 10 years. If you look at the last 10-15 years, it's happening every 2-3 years. Same is the case with flash floods in some parts of the range. I remember in Chitral in Pakistan, 40 years people have been living there. They have no memory of anything like a flash flood. Suddenly there was a flash flood, I think about 5-6 years ago, and then the next year after there was another flash flood. So what used to be an unknown phenomenon altogether has suddenly become a periodic phenomenon. So these changes will have a very compounding impact on how humans also respond to them, right? People will lose tolerance to losses, because of the kind of catastrophic losses they are facing. There'll be more interaction potentially with snow leopards in some areas. So I wish I could say straightforward that what will be the effect on tourism and all. We don't really know. In some areas it might end up getting better because the tourism season may increase, for some people. In some areas it will completely turn it on its head, and it'll just make it a much shorter and a much harsher season altogether. So it's really a bit of it's a bit complex than linear, as I would say.
Okay, and so tell me, you've worked across all the 12 range countries. What are some of the most successful community-based conservation strategies that you've seen, and things that some of which might be in India, but some of which may not? So what are the ones that you would identify as being most successful and things that we could replicate here?
So I would say the most successful programs for snow leopard conservation are the ones that look at partnership. You build partnership with the local communities, you build partnership with the local authorities, or you build partnership with the agencies. The key being, and partnership, it really can be broken down into multiple components where, to have a good partnership, you have to be present in an area, you have to be very apt with your approach, you have to be responsive to what your partner's needs are, you have to be ethical in your approaches, and so on. So I think the key, especially, and I wouldn't want to limit it to snow leopard conservation, but across the board, some of the most successful sustained conservation programs build partnerships with local communities. They build an ownership, or they aim at building ownership within the local communities. And I think that's the key that we need to understand, because we don't have that much space as may have been available for a Yellowstone, for instance. We don't have that kind of space. We don't have the luxury of exclusion, looking at it as an exclusionary approach that, okay, we'll deal with people separately, we'll deal with conservation separately. I mean, we end up making enemies out of the key stakeholders who can be the best supporters of conservation.
Yeah. Okay, you also brought up the issue that much of the habitat is located along international borders, and a lot of this is contentious. So how does this add to the difficulty of your work and assessing species status, monitoring how well it's doing? How do you deal with these issues?
So I think this is where a program like the Global Snow Leopard and Ecosystem Protection Program, GSLEP in short, it comes in very valuable. Now, yes, and we often say that transboundary programs are a term that donors love, countries don't love. It adds so much to the complications of dealing with an issue when you're dealing with an entirely different sovereign country. But what's really fascinating, especially in case of snow leopard, is that not just these 12 countries have come together and endorsed what we call as the Bishkek Declaration for snow leopard conservation, but they have agreed to make unanimous decisions, which means everyone has to agree on what we want to do. And it's not like one country will, there's no voting. They agree unanimously. And I think this is the convening power of the snow leopard, that brings countries together on a platform, number one, and makes them agree on issues, number two. So yes, it's not challenging. It is a complicated issue when you're dealing with multiple sovereign countries. But I think, kudos to all the 12 countries for prioritizing snow leopard conservation, for prioritizing information sharing, which facilitates management of certain landscapes within one's sovereign boundaries, but by sharing relevant information across border, which can then be treated from a wider perspective as a holistic landscape.
Fantastic. Now tell me, out of interest, is there like a database that people can access to get information about the snow leopard? Is there any such thing?
What kind of database are you looking for? Because
papers, research papers, information, photographs, I don't know, anything, because we don't, I don't think the average person knows where to go to get that sort of stuff.
All right. So to start with, and forgive me for a shameless plug here, but please do visit snowleopard.org. That's the website of the organization I work with. We have a lot of material for which explains and talks about the kind of work we are doing, and our approach is broadly about research-based, community-based conservation, or community-based conservation with research inputs. And so that you will have a lot of content there. You may also find some stuff we have created for children, some activities and tools to engage with children and people of different age groups. If you're interested in something more to do with this multi-country effort, how are countries coming together, what are they doing, and what is this whole conversation about snow leopards at that high level, then you can visit another website, which is globalsnowleopard.org. So one was snowleopard.org, the other is globalsnowleopard.org, which again has very interesting, it's like a resource center of a lot of material that has been put together, a lot of content which has been put together, and joint resolutions, declarations, consensuses endorsed by all the 12 countries and so on. So that's another website. And lastly, what you mentioned, which is like research papers and all, I urge you to please become a member of Snow Leopard Network. Now, Snow Leopard Network is an organization which is like a club of everybody who's doing something with snow leopards. And it has students, it has researchers, conservationists, officials. Anybody who's interested in snow leopard is a member. And the Snow Leopard Network has a formidable and an enviable bibliography of virtually every publication on snow leopard that has ever been brought out. And it does at times take some important decisions, because it's a consortium of all NGOs, all organizations, institutions, and so on. So that's the third. So these are the three places where you can find a lot of material, apart from, of course, social media. You just search for Snow Leopard, you have a lot of material out there as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I mean, that I think is really, really interesting. Also, in India, we had got this program where people could actually post their tiger photographs with a location and a date and a time, and you could use this for monitoring snow leopards within areas where tourists go. Do you have a similar thing for snow leopards as well? Anywhere?
Yeah. So, not quite yet. For a couple of other reasons as well, because I think I shouldn't use the word privacy in this case, but location sharing has become a bit of a challenge in some parts. New locations have opened up without being prepared for bringing in people, right? So that has been one of the reasons, and I mean, there are people going with both intentions, right? You can't stop people from going. There are people going with good intentions of let's say community-based tourism, but there are people with bad intentions of, who knows, poaching as well. One reason why we are a little more careful with sharing locations as such, other than generic idea of this region, that area, but there is an interesting initiative. We call it PAWS, which stands for Population Assessment of the World's Snow Leopards. Now, this effort is using a very carefully designed statistical framework to ultimately estimate the world's snow leopard population, because whether it's a taxi driver or a prime minister of a country, nearly all the time the first question they ask you the moment they hear you working on snow leopards is, so how many snow leopards are there in, let's say, my country or in the world? And we have no idea. We have a very rough guesstimate, which is up to 7,000. So anyway, coming back to this PAWS initiative, what this initiative is doing is it's trying to build a database, which is a mutually shareable database with checks and balances to ensure prevention of unnecessary harassment of species or even potential poaching. But this database is likely to become a good source of bringing in a lot of what I can call a citizen science data. A lot of people are seeing animals, and some people are seeing them in places where a researcher would never probably bother to look, and you end up, I didn't know there could be a snow leopard in the middle of the desert, and someone just driving past took a picture and shared, saying that, see, we saw a snow leopard in the desert. So some of this database can be extremely valuable. So there is this whole PAWS initiative, which is going to gradually become one of those resource centers where people will be able to share some of these data sets and this information.
Great. And I think the important thing that we've also said here is that if you do take a snow leopard picture, it's okay to share location data with a scientist or a group that's working with it, but not necessarily right up front on all social media, because that can lead to a problem. Don't do that. Don't do that.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
So I think that's a great message. Okay, so this has been fantastic, Koustubh. I think we've covered so much stuff, and I think people are going to really enjoy this. We might bombard you with some questions later if somebody comes up with something, but we'll be in touch. Thank you. And
pleasure talking to you, Latika. Thank you. And thank you.
We think economy and ecology are one and the same. In fact, economy is dependent on ecology.